prefer the real battle royales. Not this fake stuff. Fortnite and other games pretty much stole the concepts, but didn't have the decency to credit the originals. You know what? I'm here to set the record straight. There is only one type of battle royale, and it's been literally happening for thousands of years. It's also been a good way to keep population under control. Now, just in case you've been living under a rock, a battle royale is fought between 3 or more competitors until only one is left. Usually it's much more than just 3 though. There could be hundreds or even thousands of players. Oftentimes in history, civil wars are kind of like one giant battle royale with multiple factions all competing for control over a single nation. The winning side is normally pretty easy to spot too, since the victors get to lead the country after it's all said and done. Sometimes the conquerors come from within, but they can also be outside players that just decide to join in a little late. So with that said, here are some of the original battle royale victories in history. So obviously, this mess of an empire just had to be included. It's like they didn't even have a player limit, they just let anyone in on this game. We aren't gonna focus on one particular event in the Holy Roman Empire, because the battles and diplomacy kind of took place over its entire existence. It was a giant game that lasted for 1,000 years. However, things didn't start off too chaotic. Originally, the HRE was pretty unified. Things obviously changed though after certain periods. It became less centralized and territories within it were more independent. It started in East Francia, which was a successor state to Charlemagne's big old territory. That empire broke up into 3, and the eastern part of the division would become increasingly more powerful, as Otto Guy became the first Holy Roman Emperor after taking lands in Italy and then being crowned the new King of the Romans. He did actually control Rome at this time, so I guess the name makes sense for now. It also grew in size as it would later control Bohemia and Burgundy as well. Eventually, the HRE would become an elective monarchy, which sounds pretty wild, because it is. Powerful princes, called prince-electors, would vote for a leader that typically lasted until they died. This whole thing was kind of short-lived though, as one family basically turned it back into a hereditary thing for a few centuries. The Holy Roman Emperor would come from the House of Habsburg for a while. Then there's the end of the 30 Years' War, which made this stuff even crazier, since now the states could pretty much do whatever. They didn't have to listen to an emperor. These countries had more freedom than ever before. This place should have probably changed its name to the Holy Roman Confederation. But then again, they clearly didn't mind naming themselves just whatever they wanted. Whether it was true or not, they didn't care. To be fair though, I do want to mention, it did start off kind of holy, and it did control the city of Rome, and it definitely was an empire. So yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. This battle royale never officially finished though, since someone was about to take all the servers down and completely end the fun. But some players had already left the game even before this, so I think people were just over it. Eventually, the competition continued for a little while in what was called the German Confederation. This was kind of a short game though, because someone was about to finally come out on top. Prussia, with their incredible army, formed the German Empire, solidifying their epic victory royal. Now we can talk about so many different times this went down in Chinese history, but let's focus on arguably the most known, and also the most mythical. Now we refer to this time as the Three Kingdoms period, but there are actually over a dozen different sides fighting for control. All of these warlords across the east competed for the whole of China. So it started with the decline of the Han Dynasty, an inefficient central government, natural disasters that wrecked the population, and wars with outside peoples all contributed to the collapse. Local territories were increasingly forced to just fend for themselves. But the jump out of the battle bus officially started things with the Yellow Turban Rebellion. It was named this because the revolting side wore yellow to represent Earth, an element they hoped would extinguish the fire started by their enemies. So in this scenario, everything changed when the Earth Nation attacked? Which side are you gonna help now? Rulers were taken and cities were captured. The country was now split between rebels, warlords, and governors. On a positive note though, technology improved significantly during this time. Scientific and, of course, military advancements were all made as the chaos broke out. Eventually, the battle royale would come down to 3 competing sides after decades of fighting, but the Jin Dynasty would come out on top. Now this victory would last for a little while, up until the next one started, because as I said, this is China we're talking about. It's like a tradition here to start one of these every few centuries. We should just call this Battle Royale land. This war would later on become romanticized by even other countries like Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, and their stories have been told throughout their respective histories. This was also around the time Buddhism arrived in China, as it would come through the Silk Road. Millions of Chinese would convert, along with the already present Taoism and Confucianism populations. Battle Royales are a pretty big deal when they occur, because things could have easily ended with very different results. So Alexander created one of the largest empires of the ancient world. He inherited the throne of Macedon after his father's death when he was only 20 years old. During his youth, he was tutored by the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle, and he also tamed an untamable wild horse, which he would later go on to name a city after. Just because, why not, I guess? He got tired of naming cities after himself, so he decided to switch it up a bit. He invaded the Persian Empire and started a series of campaigns that would last about 10 years. He conquered Anatolia, Egypt, Persia, and even as far as northern India. He would spread Greek culture to new territory and leave an impact on the land that can still be seen to this day. The problem was, he was going to die at the age of 32 with a massive empire and no clear heir. He would literally have enough strength to request 3 last wishes on his deathbed, but he didn't think to pick who was going to lead the largest kingdom known to man. I don't know why he just didn't look over at someone while he was dying and be like, just give the throne to, what's your name? Jonathan, give it to Jonathan. There was almost an immediate fight between his generals after Alexander kicked the bucket. There were multiple possible successors, but no obvious answer. Though one of Alexander's wives, that's right, one, he was a player, just like many rulers in history. Yeah, one of them was pregnant. There was no guarantee the child would be a boy. And yeah, you couldn't really figure that stuff easily out back in the day. Unfortunately, it was a boy. He was Alexander IV, but he would have needed to be much older anyways to avoid the crisis. This was just one of many reasons why the territory would splinter into multiple kingdoms. Now, I guess you could argue that all these new states had a rightful claim to the former empire, but no single one would take it all. The local population, which they ruled over, started giving them a lot of trouble. Then there was the outside invaders, that didn't help either. The winner, or I guess I should say the winners, of this ancient battle royale was actually not even Greek. They were both neighbors, just chilling, until they got powerful enough to steal the W away. Parthia would take the eastern part of Alexander's former empire, and Rome would take the west. None of the Hellenistic kingdoms would reunite these lands. Although the Seleucids got pretty big, I guess we can give them a little bit of credit for that. Humans arrived in the Indian subcontinent more than 50,000 years ago. Along with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley civilization popped up here as well. Eventually, separate kingdoms, cities, and republics stretched across the entire territory. A lot like China, this region of the world would go on to play several battle royales, but unlike China, which united and had a lot of winners, there weren't as many here. If any, to be honest. I guess you could argue the Maurya Empire was the first to achieve a victory. The state was actually the largest political entity to ever exist here. It at one point spanned from Iran all the way to Burma. They even conquered territory from Alexander's former empire. But with all that said, they didn't really control everything. There was still a little piece missing. Their decline would occur due to weak successions, so their conquest wasn't fully complete. The Gupta Empire would control much of India, but not nearly as much compared to their predecessors. Then there was the Delhi Sultanate, which would become one of the only powers to stop the Mongolian invasion, so that was a rare achievement. They ruled for a few centuries, but then they were replaced by Mongol descendants. So I guess they did get their revenge, after all. These were the Mongols who rose up to dominate most, but again, not all of South Asia. Very close to it, though. They too would eventually fall, but from a completely new challenger. These enemies came from the sea. Europe, to be exact. The British would seemingly unite the entire region for the first time ever after literally thousands of years. They probably have the best claim to victory, but do they really? After Britain dominated the region and most of the other European colonies left, over 500 Indian states still remained throughout the territory. While they might have been vassals, they were semi-sovereign and not directly controlled by the crown, just like indirectly. I guess one could say they didn't have complete control over everything. It's up for debate. Even after gaining their independence, the partition of India created 2 separate dominions. No one entity has conquered it all. I think this battle royale might even still be quietly resuming, even to this day. Now before we get into the final one here, here's some honorable mentions. The Russian Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, and everything that was going down in Yugoslavia, which I didn't talk about because I don't want to die. Finally, this of course had to be number 1. It is probably the most famous real-life battle royale ever, and it all took place on a few islands without any outside interventions. Sengoku period was an event in Japanese history with near constant military conflict for over 100 years. It all started with a dispute over succession, which, is that really a surprise to anyone at this point? How many times did this happen? This war is what kicked things off, and eventually, lords across the country would all compete for total control. Even some of the powerful clans and religious groups got in on it and increased their influence over certain territories. Revolts were prominent, and some were even successful in overthrowing superiors. It really was complete chaos. Now, like I said, there was no outside intervention, But this was around the time the Europeans started showing up, so they got to witness all the madness as well. First Portugal, and later the Dutch, they both arrived with explorers, missionaries, and merchants. They went on to open a trade factory in Japan, but it must have been a little awkward. You know, with all the mayhem unfolding, it's like walking in on a family yelling at each other at the dinner table. Now as time went by and the Warring States period started winding down, the Japanese decided it was a good idea to invade Korea, even though Japan still hadn't unified yet. There were 2 separate invasions, and at one point, they controlled a large amount of territory in the peninsula. China would eventually force them back out though, so that was nice of them. The Koreans would no longer have to worry about those crazy Japanese, for a while at least. Now 3 main dudes would end up contributing a lot to unification, and their victory left an obvious lasting impact on the islands. The more than a century-long conflict with dozens of powerful leaders all killing each other finally had come to an end. But these are just a few of my personal favorite battle royales in history. Which one is your favorite? And let me know down below which ones I might have missed. There's actually a lot, surprisingly, a whole lot. I'm just excited for our first battle royale here in the US. I don't think we've had one yet in our history, but it's definitely getting closer. I think it could break out at any second, so I'm gonna go hide in a bush. See you next time. Big thanks to the patrons: Elphie C, Elijah Senpai, Ruserification, SwissAargau, Maxy G, Ben Moke, Galli, Furry Cruz, MisterPERKELE, CooterDonkey, Brendan Hinkle, Alfonso M6, Millatime, Hueylongdong, Double Books, MyMainManManny, Mega Fat Boy 2.0, The Hentai Lover, and Sleeper56.